Hi, this is Swapnil Bharti and welcome to TFR Let's Talk. Today we have with us Steve Litras, Director of Technical Marketing at Crible. Steve, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Today we're going to talk about observability, the challenges, especially if you look at the cloud native space. It's a busy, crowded space. Before we go there, I would love to know a bit about the company itself.
Our mission is to unlock the value of all of your observability data. We have a number of people who came from Splunk, we basically have built a tool that sits in between all of your sources and all of your destinations, and allows you to do things with the data in flight in the stream. So we can do a lot of enrichment use cases. We can do lookups. We can enrich the data with things like GeoIP, threat feed protection, that kind of thing, or threat feed data, so that when you want to send it to your logging analysis system or your time series database or any of that kind of thing, you can actually have additional context added to it. We also do a lot to allow you to kind of reduce that volume. So, most people have way more data going into their analysis systems than they actually use. So we give you the ability to fine tune that down, to take all the data that you maybe aren't using or aren't analyzing and kind of keep it from coming into the system. We have other capabilities to be able to archive that off and replay it later. But that's kind of fundamentally what our product does. We are we're very much focused on the observability market, and we think the observability market and the security market are very tightly, I won't say coupled, but very tightly related, in that a lot of them use the same data. So we're trying to provide flexibility in the path for any organization to be able to take their observability data and their security data and route it any way they want to, and enrich it or reduce it as they see fit.
I also want to talk about the role, the importance of observability in the cloud native or modern environments.
Yeah, it's become more and more important when you look at, you go from being on-prem, right, where you have control of you have control of where your data goes, you have control of how it flows there, and you start moving to the cloud. I came from a large organization that we did a pretty significant migration into the cloud. There are all sorts of new challenges that come with that. Things like understanding what your egress costs are going to look like, how your data gets moved around, but also how your apps run and exist, because a lot of the same tools that you use on-prem no longer really work in the cloud. Really, the way we look at observability is that observability is really the ability to ask questions that you never thought you needed to ask. So to have the data to be able to address questions about your environment that you maybe never thought of. So with that, it's really important to be able to gather as much of that data as possible, and even things that you don't think you need, eventually you may need them. So we're trying to facilitate the ability to pull all that stuff in and do whatever you need with it, either now or in the future.
Right. If we just go to the basic, observability, when I look at it, it's like having complete visibility into your, whatever you're doing. It could be important from security's perspective. It could be important from performance. It could be about, cost also. So it's essential. But as you initially said, that there are a lot of tools and a lot of companies, projects are offering observability solutions, but it's also creating a massive amount of data. Now, it's you do want to have visibility. You can put 15 windows on the same wall, right? But so let's get into that. Yes, we should have it, but what kind of data people are collecting and how much of that data is actually valuable, and then we'll go to the point that you're making, that how you are helping customers to actually extract value from the data.
Absolutely. So I go back to my past. I was at one point, I was running a lab for about 300 people, and I was constantly getting beat up because things weren't working. People would find problems before I'd get there. I came across an ad for Splunk, downloaded it, put my logs in there, and all of a sudden I became the hero, because I would come in the morning and I would just type, error, and I would go look for any of the errors in the system, and I'd fix them before anybody noticed them. That's great and super useful, but then other parts of the organization start to see what you're doing and they realize how valuable that data is. So, we ended up with security starting to say, yeah, you need to retain all of that data for, 12, 16 months, 18 months. And we want all this other data. Well, what ends up happening there is, when you started out, you were just running it for what you needed. And it was super efficient, worked really well. But then all these other needs come in and, your efficiency drops, your costs go up, especially definitely the costs go up because all of this data that you're consuming because that you're ingesting because it's going into a log analysis system that's built for, very fast needle in a haystack searches. All this data is now in there, and boom, you've kind of muddied up your environment. We have seen that probably 90+% in most organizations of the data they feed into their observability systems goes really unanalyzed. So how do you get that value out of it, right? It's when you're kind of conflating your retention of data and stocking stuff away for a future problem, which is a lot of the security use case. You want as much high fidelity data as you can get when you have, say, a breach that you want to be able to go back and analyze. So it's kind of insurance for that. But if you can separate that out from the analysis, you can actually start to just focus on the data that you truly get value out of. And you can work to enhance that value. And that's where things like adding context comes in. That's where things like cleaning up the data so that you have better data quality. Those are all things that we can facilitate.
It's good to have all these observability solutions, but is there any kind of playbook or best practice that just having those cameras installed is not sufficient? You should also be getting something out of it. So of course we'll talk about your product service also, but is there any playbook? Just talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think with observability data, your insurance policy is having everything there, but you're not going to look at everything on a regular basis. So it's really understanding what are the key things for your day-to-day business that you need to deal with, operationally. And that may very well be, we have lots of cases internally. We do things like, I've got VPC flow logs and firewall logs that I pull in. I save them off to Amazon S3. I only ingest metrics for those, right? So I'll go through and process those. I'll create metrics. And then I don't really have to go deal with any of that data unless I see an anomaly. If I see an anomaly, I can go back and get that data and bring it in. But because of that, I'm getting value out of the data, but I'm not necessarily ingesting all of it. But it takes really understanding what your environment looks like, what the things are important to you operationally, so that you can define what that is. So, there's no silver bullet in it. The playbook is really understanding what your operational needs are, the data that's important for those operational needs, and then laser focusing on those while keeping all the other stuff that you're keeping around for insurance off to the side. So you have it available, but it's not impacting you all the time.
One of the critical aspects of observability, I mean, everything is important, is kind of security. And sometimes when you do look at a lot of security focused tools, they're kind of overlap with observability and security. So how do you see it? Do they complement? Is there a tension between them? Is there too much overlap? There are gaps?
I mean, I would answer yes. There's both tension and overlap. There are both, most security teams are going to look at a lot of the same data that your operational team is going to look at. They're going to look at it asking different questions, and that's really kind of the key. A lot, when you look at all the security data that's coming in, a good portion of that data you're never going to look at unless you have an incident to go deal with. So that gives you, that's where I think the tension is, and that is that security teams are going to want everything for a long period of time. If you go back to 2018, Ponemon put out a study that said that the average, time from a breach occurring to it being detected was about 197 days. That's the average, right? We have plenty of documented cases out there in the real world, real public ones like the Marriott breach and Old Dominion, where it was more than a year, more than a couple of years. So, if you don't have that level of retained data, you're going to have a hard time going back and finding the entire scope of the incident. So this is where I think that the tension has always come in those places where you have the ops team that tends to look at the logs as, what do I need to do now to deal with what's going on? Versus the security team who has that same issue, maybe a different view of the data, but they have the same issue, but they have a bigger issue of, if something happened in the past, how do I deal with it? That's, I think, where the big tension is. But I think that's also where the opportunity is with the ability to archive that stuff and pull it back in.
Now, let's talk about, we have talked about problem side of it. Let's talk about Crible. What kind of solutions are you offering to your users and customers?
So our primary product is Crible Logstream. Logstream is a purpose-built observability pipeline in a box, effectively. Although we don't ship a box, but it's out of the box. Excuse me. We have our concept is that, as I mentioned earlier, we sit in the middle of the environment. We can consume data from all of your sources. We can consume data from the Splunk agent, from the Beats agent, from open source or Telegraph, any of those kind of tools, StatsD, et cetera. And then we can both enrich it, we can reduce it, we can do things like redaction, for security use cases. We do all that in the stream so that then we can deliver it to one or more of any destinations you like. We started out very much Splunk focused, but we're adding new destinations and new sources pretty much every release. We support Kafka, we support all of the tick stack, we support. I could go on. I mean, there are a bunch of them. We support S3, we support Azure Blob, and we're actually building more support for Azure and GCP kind of in the next couple of versions. So, we can sit in the middle. We can provide that universal routing capability. We can provide the universal collector capability. When I think of like a receiver, right? So most companies end up deploying multiple agents on all their systems, right? So they bring in Splunk, and now they got to put the Splunk universal forwarder on there. And then maybe they bring in an APM tool, and they've got to put the agent for that or the runtime for that. They might have additional tools that are out there that are all looking at the same data. What we want to provide is the ability to help people say, you know what, these two agents completely overlap. Let's just consume it from one place, do whatever enrichment and changes we need to get the data where we want, and boom, we can actually reduce the footprint there. So universal receiver for that portion, universal router to route the data around, and really delivery to any destination you'd like to deliver your data to.
Can you talk about open source at Crible? Do you folks do open source? Do you consume open source? Do you contribute to open source?
Yeah, we're a big consumer of open source, and we actually support a lot of open source tools. So while Logstream is a commercial product, we support sources and destinations that are open source in nature. I mentioned Telegraph. Elastic, all of the Elastic suite, we support the open source version or the commercial versions. We also use open source libraries and tools within the product, but we're starting to do more open sourcing ourselves. So we recently just open sourced a technology that I'm really excited about called Appscope, which is a black box instrumentation tool. So we're going to be doing more and more open sourcing as time goes on, but we're active in the community, we're active consumers of it, and more and more will be active producers.
Can you go a bit deep into Appscope? You said it's kind of black box. Talk a bit about it, what exactly it is, what does it do, and then you'll talk about the open source code or community around it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Appscope, as I mentioned, is something we just released a few months ago. We just released a new version of it about 2 weeks ago, or I think it was actually it was on April Fool's Day. What Appscope is total black box instrumentation. So this was one of the reasons I was super interested in coming to Crible. As I was talking to Crible, I got an idea of what they were planning here. From the organization I was in, we had APM, and we had gone through a couple different vendors for APM, but it was so expensive that we only really instrumented about 10% of our business processes, kind of the most critical things. But there was this 90% that just is not being touched. And I can't get, the instrumentation of doing each one of those is both expensive and time consuming. Appscope is really intended to fill that gap where companies have an APM environment that they're focusing on for, source code line level investigations of performance issues and whatnot. But this other 90%'s out there that we can actually help provide. So Appscope interposes itself between the application and all the system libraries. It runs in, it is a user land process, or not process, a user land component within the process. And it emits logs or events and metrics. It can be interposed into pretty much any runtime. There are a couple there are a couple older ones that we can't really support, but for the most part, I can go use scope on a Linux box that I can scope things like bash, like LSOF. So if I'm having a problem with my laptop, I can use scope to grab, maybe I'm having a problem with bash where it's, or with my shell where it's timing out or slowing down. I can actually use scope to go look at exactly what it's doing there. I can see every file that it's opened. I can see the metrics of how much memory it's using. I can see the system calls it's making. I can see where it's holding up. If the application makes REST calls or web calls, I can see that. I can actually see the payload if I want to. So I have all this ability to really troubleshoot down to one little process, but that can actually expand out into any application you want to manage. We're using Appscope internally for our sandbox farm, which is how we let people learn about our product. And we're capturing metrics and events off of that sandbox environment so that we understand not just kind of the traditional, what I would consider like traditional metrics around, everything's coming up, or the containers are spinning up, they're being used, et cetera. I can actually see what's going on inside of those to whatever level I see fit. As I mentioned, it's black box, it's open source, it's available now. You can go to appscope.dev and pull it down. Build it, use it as you see fit. We do expect that this will become more of a core part of our product set going forward. We will leverage the technology, but we're also very committed to keeping it open source. As far as the community side, we actually have released it to our community, and we are, it's on GitHub. It's we take PRs and whatnot just like anybody else. We are focusing on the Crible community to start because that's kind of where it's all the people we already know, and they're already very interested in observability. So this is just kind of an additional huge benefit for them.
Steve, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about not only Crible, not only Appscope, but also going deeper into not only the importance of observability, but how, not just getting all the data, but getting value out of data is much more important. So thanks for this great discussion, and I look forward to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thanks much for having me. I appreciate it.